Our main software for stitching is called Autopano Video Pro. We are right now, the version that's public right now is called Autopano Video Pro 2.6. And the idea here is that I'm going to show you a little bit some of the functionalities that are coming in Autopano Video 3.0. So I'm using right now, what's open behind me is actually the 3.0. It's an internal version. It's a really early alpha version. So the final version hopefully will not look like this. It will have like a little bit of redesign because this is still the old interface. But the technology in there is pretty exciting. At first, it's going to be especially exciting for people who use the Omni. So the Omni is the GoPro rig with 6 cameras on it, and it's synchronized. And because we know the geometry so well, we can actually do some pretty cool things. So I'll probably end by doing this. One of the really cool new feature of Autopano Video Pro is if you've been using 2.6, you notice that this was not here before. It's the GoPro VR player preview. So when you work in 360, you're always working with the equirectangular view. And if you want to check, if you want to check what's happening at the nadir, if you want to sort of look around and see how it feels, you either have to render the file, put it in an Oculus Rift or something, or you have to sort of move the file, move the horizon around and try to see what's happening here and there. So with just this new button, you have just a small manipulation to do on the VR player, basically activating an option, restarting it, and now you can have the real-time preview in a VR environment, which means that if I were to connect, if I was on a PC and connected my Oculus Rift or my HTC Vive, I could actually have a look in my headset straight from Autopano Video Pro without having to do any rendering, without having to do anything. So that's one of the really cool feature, and so I launched Premiere at the same time, so I'm not sure if this is actually going to be working fine, but let's see. Yeah, so we can even play and preview like that. So this is without any rendering, without any stitching, with some stitching, but without any rendering. So we're already having a good look at what we're doing, and it's all like the GoPro VR player like it is, so you can have the little planet, really have a good look around. And so you can see that, well, okay, I got a small stitch line, and especially the main problem is happening when the guy is going through, the guy is jumping through next to the camera. So we have our hair, we can see it pretty clearly here. So we have those small problems. And what's the main advantage of this new version of Autopano Video Pro is actually happening here. It's something we call D-warp. So it's an optical flow system. And right now it's still an alpha version, so we will be next week, hopefully, or the week after that, if it's not done by next week. We will be releasing a public alpha version, so anyone with an Omni, who wants to, will be able to download and try for free. If you have the license keys for Autopano Video 2.6, you'll be able to try for free the newest version, and you will be able to try it. And using the feedback we will get from all those users, we will be able to sort of fine-tune how much settings we give access to the general public, because you can have a lot of settings for this, but playing with those settings can break the algorithm pretty quickly. And what it actually does is that if I I'm going to actually select a very, very short thing, because this is kind of computer heavy. So if I select I'm going to do an out here, and I'm going to do my in here. So I have just this small area selected, and I'm going to click on Compute D-warp. This needs to be the very last step that you're going to do in the stitching process, because you need to first have a pretty good stitch. You need still to go through Autopano Giga, and you still need to work through the control points and have a little bit of making your stitching better, because basically what the software is doing right now is it's analyzing the borders, the frontiers between all the different images. And by using optical flow algorithm and using the contrast of the pixels and analyzing the images, it's able to understand that if between my two cameras I get a line that's like this when it's supposed to be like this, it's going to be able to sort of bend the image to make those lines match. So if my two lines are like this, I don't have to bend them much to fit them together. So that bend, that slight warping, will be pretty much invisible and will do a very good job. If my two lines to start with are like this, the software is not going to be able to actually move the images and better the stitch. It's just going to try to connect those two lines. So it might end up doing something slightly weird like that, and so you're going to start seeing those lines bending.
We have, can I interrupt?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like,
Okay.
it's a group conversation.
We had very troubled times to stitch images which was in movement.
Yeah.
We made a film in 360 in the Amazon forest, and one of the scenes we put the cameras on a boat. Okay. And let the boat flow. It is an incredible image because it's stopped, you know, but it's moving.
Yeah.
But when we got to the stitching process, it was very, very hard because it's so many moving things, you know.
Okay.
And do you think this new version could help us to have a better stitching?
So this new version will definitely help in terms of bettering those situations, especially like the warping. It really depends, and in those kind of situations, it really depends on in terms of what do you use to film, how do you position your camera, what frame rate are you using. And it's really a combination of all of those factors, because for some movements, it's actually not the stitching, it's the rolling shutter issues that you're seeing. It's because you have two cameras in two different directions with their shutters just, the sensors rolling, and basically you're starting to capture the top of the image with one camera and the bottom of the image with the other. So when you're going through the sensors and with a lot of motions, you're gonna start having those issues with rolling shutter. And that's the same thing. Actually, like the warping algorithm is gonna be, with the first release we're doing with this alpha version, we're gonna be supporting only the Omni. But the plan is that we are supporting more cameras as the time goes on, because we know that not everybody works with Omni. We're gonna be aiming first at cameras that we know are widely used in the field, and cameras that are synchronized, because the synchronization is one of those things that really helps in terms of stitching. With the Omni, you do have a rolling shutter correction. This is something that's not going to be available for anything else, because the rolling shutter correction, actually, we need some very specific metadata to be able to do it. And we grab it only with the Omni because that's our own camera. So rolling shutter correction, that's the first step you would need to take there. And then I can, hopefully I have some files I can sort of show you small techniques to better that stitch at some point. I can maybe do some like rendering. Just briefly now, you see I've computed the warping, and if you look now around here, you see exactly what I was talking about, which is that slight bending here that's happening. So here we had the two lines were not connected, and now it managed to connect it, so it looks more normal, but it does have, because those two lines were not really aligned, you do have that slight bending happening. And the main thing is what's happening when the guy is jumping in front of the camera. So we went from.
There is a small mistake.
There is still a small mistake, absolutely, because again, still. And actually, I think I did not compute that part. You still have a small mistake. So here is typically an example where we could actually do a second render. We could actually do something that would help masking those stitch lines with a moving object. I can sort of render that quickly. I can probably do like a quick render while I'm talking, and we'll be able to see that. So what you would actually do for something like that is that you're going to do a first render in Sharp. This one I probably no, it's not going to be aligned perfectly. So I'm just gonna go there and do that. So that's gonna be warp, no time code. I'm not gonna put the time code. And I'm gonna put it in sharp. And I'm gonna apply. And I'm gonna render it. And then I'm also gonna create a second one that I'm gonna render in smooth. And we'll go into After Effects. And, oh shit, well, it's okay. And I'm gonna render that as well. Okay, so we got a couple of minutes to wait. With the warping, will actually do a very good job in terms of masking those stitch lines because it will actually like make them disappear because it's linking everything together. In some situations where you have a lot of basically it does not solve all the parallax issues because parallax is still a thing that's happening. Like parallax is completely unavoidable. So in some cases the algorithm has to make a choice. And it will either stitch something in the front, stitch something in the back, but it won't be able to, it will be able to correct most of the things, but if you have some very, very high differences, and that's kind of what's happening here with the mountain bike. The mountain bike the jump was happening probably less than around 50 centimeters away from the rig, which if you're familiar with multi-camera rigs, basically everybody you talk to will tell you that with something like a 6 GoPro rig, the safe distance is at least 1.50 meters, probably around 2 meters. And if you want to completely avoid any pain in the stitching process, you should probably even do 3 meters. 3 meters, you're going to be able to stitch anything you want at any moment. Here we have 3 frames to correct in post-production with the warping. But we have something that's happening less than 50 centimeters away from you. So that means that with the headset, you're flying over the jump, and you see a guy just going straight in front of you, which is a pretty impressive moment, and that's a pretty cool shot that you would be able to get without those algorithms. But instead of having 3 frames to correct in After Effects, you would have probably 60 to 70 frames to correct. Yeah, go on, please.
So what this algorithm does, if I understood right, is the same process that you would do if you stitch manually in After Effects. You kind of move the images so that it...
So if, for example, in After Effects, you are exporting the 6 individual stitched videos, and then you're doing some warping on each of the videos, that's exactly what the algorithm is doing. So it's actually going to be, but it's going to do a much better job, and it's going to do it much faster. You're just going to save probably a full day of work if you don't have to go through that process with each of the shots. So now we have our 2 renders. I do need to find where I put them, but it's probably here, and it's over here. Just very briefly, one of the last things we had, and it's really cool for like the people who do advanced post-production and do work in teams, for like bigger production companies, is that now in the rendering tab you have a full timecode reference, and we can grab the timecode references. So if you're working with Blackmagic cameras and things like that, you have the timecodes. You can have like external timecodes synchronization. So you can use the synchronization from the external timecodes system to have a frame synchronization at the start, so because like a Blackmagic rig will not be synchronized. And then you can also use that information when you are exporting. So that looks, I've actually done the render before the workshop for this one. It looks like this. So over here, I got my timecode. I can select either to start at 0 with 1 frame, use the internal clock, or use my own timecode reference that I want to apply. And this timecode is also read. This timecode is also read by Adobe Premiere. So that means that if you are working with frame sequences and you have people doing VFX in After Effects or in Nuke, and you have people doing some editing in Premiere and then some grading somewhere else, everybody can be absolutely certain that they work with the exact same frames and that your edit is not going all over the place. And that also means that you're going to be working only with the frames that you need to work with, not having to do 4 seconds before, 4 seconds after, just in case. So that's also with AVP3 we really, because the stitching process with something like the warp is going to get faster and faster and faster and faster. The actual stitching and working with control points and making sure the videos are stitched together is something that in a few years we'll be looking back at what we've been doing for the past 2 years, and we'll just be laughing because it's going to be a one-click. It's going to be one click while we are copying from the SD cards on the computers, and we're going to have a perfect stitch. And that means that now what we're really looking at is first like finding out and creating that one button, one click solution for the stitching for any camera. But it's also, okay, now that we know how to do that, how do we make it easier for what's happening after? Because, okay, you have your stitch, but you still have a guy, you still have a tripod or a guy at the nadir. You still have your Mantis RC car that's holding your rig. You still have your drones, and you might want now to add VFX, add all of those things into the image. And that's also some of the steps we're taking. That's why we've implemented the timecode, and that's also why we've worked with the Foundry so that now Nuke can open Cava files. And that means that now you can open the Cava file in Nuke, and you already have, like, the images are correctly distorted. Nuke can understand our algorithm for the distortion, and that means that we now have a completely integrated ecosystem, because that's not our job to create a VFX, or like we're not going to go and compete against After Effects on Nuke or something like that. So that's kind of where we're going with that version, is really taking care of how do we make sure that it's as easy as possible to stitch, and then what can we do for you guys who are creating those experiences to make sure that it's as efficient as possible and as easy as possible to then do the actual creating part, because stitching is just a pain, and we want to get rid of it as fast as possible.
Yes.
So
using Omni system,
yeah,
we should expect less pain in stitching process? Or?
Yeah, basically what the Omni does is, for me, the main advantages of the Omni is first the synchronization. Like synchronization, if some of you have been working with something like a Freedom 360 or like any non-synchronized rig, even a Blackmagic rig with like 220 lenses, the synchronization was always a pain, because if you're shooting at 60, even shooting at 60 FPS with some guys doing some mountain biking, you are going to have issues if you have half a frame of difference, because if somebody's doing like 50 kilometers per hour downhill, even half a frame of synchronization is gonna show, and that half frame, you cannot do anything about it. There's like no way to correct that, no way to get that. Even with some shots we did at 120 frames per second, we still had like some issues with synchronizing some of the cameras. So that's for us one of the main advantages, that like you have that peace of mind that you know everything is synchronized. And then what we did on the software side is really also making the workflow faster. So right now we are working, I'm also doing a masterclass with journalists. We sent them on the field this morning. They went out to shoot with an Omni. 3 groups went out to shoot with an Omni. This afternoon, the stitching and the starting to edit. And basically tomorrow at 3 or 3:30, we're doing a conference on the main stage showing a result. That means that between this morning and tomorrow at 3, they will have created a 1 minute, 2 minute journalism piece in VR. I don't know. But I know that right now, because they've been using the Omni, they can use the Omni Importer. The Omni Importer is not just something that helps you copy things onto your computer. It's something that helps you, that also allows you, for example, to create a first render. And so you can, while you're copying, you are rendering, you are already doing like a render. And that's what I told them, is that render in 2K, H.264 2K, the stitch is not going to be perfect. For some cases, it's going to be good, but for some cases, it's going to be far from perfect. 2K is too low resolution, but even a not perfect stitch and a low resolution is enough to go into Premiere and to start putting your experience together. Because those guys, they come back from their shoot, they have like 5 minutes 30 of footage with one scene. Out of those 5 minutes 30, they're only going to be using 25 seconds. Which 25 seconds exactly are they going to be using? Well, that's something that you decide in Premiere. So why would you stitch and why would you make sure that all the 5 minutes are perfect when actually you just need to focus on 25 seconds? So with the Omni importer, you are doing that render, you are going straight into Premiere, straight into like that editing process. And then once you've locked your edit, then you can go back into AVP and actually work only on those frames that you really need. And that's kind of where we're going. And because they're using Omni, they don't have on the computers they have there, they don't have that internal version of AVP3, but I have it with me. So for some of the shots, we'll be able to use the dewarp algorithm, and we're going to be able to make it better. We're going to be able to make those stitches better. Maybe for some situations, they've been a little bit more ambitious than they should have. And I'm betting that's going to be the case because most of them had never seen a 360 rig before yesterday. So like that's those kind of things. I would not have been confident. I would not have agreed to do something like that if we had been working with Freedom 360, 6 GoPros, non-synchronized rigs, because even just getting them to understand how do you synchronize, making sure that they have like a good clap and then a movement so that we have multiple options to synchronize, like making sure we have all of those tools to be able to actually just stitch together the footage would have been a challenge. And I'm pretty sure one of the team would have come back with half of the footage shot with the wrong settings. And if you're shooting with the wrong settings, then like the shot is not redeemable. With the Omni, you only have the right settings. So I really feel like the Omni is a good solution for those kind of cases where you want to have professional grade quality, and at the same time you're not yet professional in VR.
Okay.
Yeah.
You were talking a lot about the Omni, but what about the Fusion?
Fusion is sort of the next step. Fusion is also. So Fusion is going to be the baby brother of the Omni. It's not going to be competing directly with the Omni. It's still for us. It's between consumer and prosumer. It's for us. It's really a step further than something like a Gear 360 or Ricoh Theta S, because of the quality you get, because of and because of some of the things that I cannot tell you, but there are some things that make it not a full-on consumer camera, but it's way easier than something like the Omni. Basically, it's already that sort of one-click solution to have something that's up to 5.2K with a stitch that's from everything we've seen. And I've been doing a lot of work with Fusion. Everything we've seen in terms of comparing it to other comparable systems, or to like Gear 360 and other like integrated systems, because it's a GoPro camera. It's not a multi-camera array. It's an integrated camera. So compared to some of the things we've seen, nothing can rival in terms of quality, in my very biased opinion, obviously. But
so in terms of the stitching process, with this we can forget about the RMS curves and the control points.
With what? With Fusion? Or with
both, and using this 3.6.
So with the, if you're using, so the warping, you still have to sort of go a little bit through that RMS curve, not RMS curve, but at least go into maybe open, like if the shot is 95% there, you can like basically just do the warp and be done with it. If the shot is like 80 or 70% there, you probably need to work a little bit on the control points and just like point it in the right direction, and then using the warp is gonna like do that final step to make sure it looks good and it's stitched properly. That's for the reason I explained earlier. If you have too many differences between your positions, you get what you saw with the mountain bike, which is it corrected some of the elements because, well, if let's say the handlebar is sort of slightly broken, this is something it can correct easily. But the tire was really broken, and that it can sort of match part of it, but there are still some elements where it's just confused by what's happening. And so if you sort of move and make it closer and make it more obvious for the algorithm that this is what you need to match together, this is what you need to stitch, then you're going to be able to actually get to a good result pretty easily. So you do need sometimes to have that first step in terms of, okay, let's still do a bit of control points. Let's still go into Autopano Giga and move around together, put together that thing. And then I'm going to go through the warping. The warp is really the last step before rendering, especially because, for example, if you're going to compute the stabilization with something like the Omni and you select the rolling shutter correction, basically this breaks the warp completely. So you do need to go through that same process you were used to going to. So stabilization, a little bit of control points, color correction, choosing your blending settings. And then the last step is, okay, let's apply the warp and see what you get out of that.
Okay, so that's, and what about the smart ISO?
Smart cutting, we're not like. Okay, so I've been at Kolor for now a little bit more than a year. I've been like getting mad at them because those are options that should not be exposed, because smart cutting will only work in some very, very, very specific situations, basically anything static with nothing moving. Because you can sort of see it if you go into the smart cutting here. So basically now that's because I've been screaming at them, and that's why we now have all those warnings all over the place when you're using smart cutting saying it's compatible with nothing. But if we apply the smart cutting, okay, we only have 10 minutes left.
Yeah, you cannot.
And it might have crashed. The joys of working with early alpha release. Yeah, it crashed. Okay, thing is, we don't have yet the stitch lines exposed in AVP, but the problem is that you can see it if you once try using smart cutting and then opening APG and go into the masks, and you're going to see the way it's cut. Mm-hmm. It's like basically you can end up with like the two images. The frontier is going to be sort of like completely changed, and then you have like. Here you have an element from that image, and like you have like sort of holes in the images because it decided that at that point it was more intelligent to use the image from that camera instead of the other, and it's like doing a lot of calculations for that. But the problem is if you have something going through here that's not 50 meters away, you're going to have like sort of weird, very weird parallax issues, because suddenly you have like a guy going through a frontier, but it's all messed up, and suddenly you have a part of him that's back from the other image, so you're again like having parallax issues there. So that's why the smart cutting is initially smart cutting is because APG is initially a photo stitching software. Smart cutting was really great for photos, basically. Like that's awesome, especially for like very complex cases. That's something that I tend to explain to people. That's sort of the first thing I explain to people when I'm doing the full trainings, explaining the story of Kolor and where we come from and some of the projects we've been able to do. We have something called there's something called Dubai 360 that's been done with our softwares, with our solution. And the first image you get when you get there, or like if you go to like the Burj Khalifa gigapixel, is like a 58 gigapixel image. So that means like you're on top of the Burj Khalifa. There's like road crossing at the bottom. You can zoom in and almost read the license plates from the cars from the top of the Burj Khalifa. I think it's 6,500 photos stitched together. And we had for a long time, we had the world record for like the biggest photo in the world with like a Paris 26 gigapixel. That was already like 2,500 photos stitched together. And there's been like somebody who's done a petapixel, I think, using our solutions as well. So that's a billion pixels.
It's too much.
and it's
How they display that?
probably with a lot of difficulties and a high bandwidth. No, but I think like it doesn't load everything at the same time, or it takes quite some time. But those things like those gigapixels are actually awesome to look at. This is such a cool experience to be able to zoom in, and like you zoom in and you like sort of look around, and at some point you remember that you can scroll back, and it's just like weird to scroll back that much and still have all that quality and still like so. That's what Autopano Giga is good at now, because we can even do those in HDR. So you can like bracket 2,000 times and then stitch that together and have HDR gigapixel panoramas. That's something that Autopano Giga can handle. Or we can also like, we have some clients who batch stitch. They do some high definition photos of books for like archive. And they batch stitch 1,500 6 photo panoramas. And they do that pretty quickly, like in a night. And it's all rendered in high definition. So that's kind of why we have all those features that sort of don't go into AVP and don't go into like video stitching. And for some reason, some of the devs made the choice to keep some of those features exposed when you are doing video, and I've been working very hard for this to stop being the case, because I've had to do a lot of support on that. Very quickly, because I basically have 5 minutes left, I can show you briefly what I was talking about, like doing those frontiers masking. That's basically the lazy solution for frontier masking. So if I'm gonna open a new project, and I'm gonna drag those two guys here. I'm gonna create one with, because select come from this. And if I go into the moment that's problematic, so that's around here, I can like just put on top here my smooth render, and it's not much better actually. Shit, damn. Oh, it's like slightly. Some cases. Huh. That's strange. Okay, I don't know why it didn't take the smooth render perfectly. There's a weird thing happening. That's again, like that's an internal version. That's a weak hold, and we still haven't like sort of roughed out the bugs. But let's sort of pretend that we like better what's happening here in that specific case. What you would actually go and do is you can just go and sort of, here is where I'm having problems. Let me see. Okay, I'm gonna just like add some feathering, so that my transition is good. And if this is my area, this is the area where I have some problems, I can just basically, but I also only have the problems in that specific moment. I can just keyframe my So I can keyframe my mask. So first making sure that I'm only seeing what's my good render, because in that specific moment everything looks good. So, and once I get here, so that the frame just before that one, I'm gonna actually go into my 100% opacity. So now in the next frame, I'm actually using the image on top. That's slightly different. Like I'm really thinking about the case you're talking about with like those frontiers with like probably trees, or like if you said it was on the Amazon, so it's like jungle.
A lot of forest, a lot of feathers.
Exactly. So like you're just like creating that small mask on the side that's only covering that area that's problematic for you. like small with a lot of feathering so that it blends nicely into the two images. You do your two renders, and you're just gonna have your two masks on the side, and just like have them. And if at some point you're like stopping, there's no more movements, you want to go back to your sharp image because that's the one you wanted initially. So, well, let's say here in that frame now I'm not looking at my I don't want my smooth rendering. I want my sharp rendering now. So I can just go back to putting a keyframe and going back to my sharp render. And I can also, that mask, I can also animate it. So I can just like decide that, okay, at that point, I just want to use this specific area. And that's really like using those masks and using like some small elements of a smooth render on top of a sharp render. You don't want to use the smooth for everything in your image, especially when you're using like 6 camera rigs, because in a lot of cases, the 6 cameras, most of the stitch lines are good. You just have 1 or 2 stitch lines. And the problem is that if you use the smooth rendering for the entire image, well, you're gonna have a lot of ghosting all over the place. You're gonna have a lot of problems all over the place. So you just want to have that very limited area where you are using the smooth rendering because you know it's kind of okay, and the result is better with a little bit of ghosting than with like that bad stitch line that's sort of jumping in your face. So that's really one of the case you can use. And with that kind of ideas of like patching and putting things on top and then masking and animating, there's like the really briefly last thing I wanted to show you guys was that's from the Fusion launch video. So we started with, we had the camera on top of a monopod here. And so I've just made a simple JPEG patch. Basically, I extracted a frame here, went into Photoshop, copied the grass with the clone stamp, and then put it back on top. So what that looks like is something like this. So now I have a JPEG. I have here, where is it? So I have this is a completely static image. This is a photo, basically, that I just extended for the full length of the shot, put on top of my pole, and now I get something that looks way cleaner. I get a nice, where is it? I get a nice sort of invisible pole. But the problem is that if I'm doing this, when my lion is going near my patch, the patch is actually on top of the head of the lion. So what I did was to actually create a mask and animate that mask. So that here, where is it? I'm actually masking everything and doing some animations frame by frame to make sure that now if I'm looking at my image, now the lion's face is not completely is not on top here. It should be on here. We should have grass on top of his face, but since it came really close to the camera and actually between the camera and the mount, now I can like just mask my patch and animate that. So that's kind of like that same principle of adding layers on top of layers, and maybe then you can just also nest that and add again some other elements into that. We did in the Fusion launch video, there's a moment with like dogs running around, and I had like multiple masks with some of them were for the moment where the dog was crossing into the sun, so we had shadow, and then the dog was then we were back with sunny grass. So I had a patch with sunny grass, a patch with shadow, and then animating all of those patches and masking them as the dogs went through, so that we had something that was completely seamless and completely invisible to the eye. If you are looking down in that video and always like watching what's happening at the nadir, you're not gonna see anything because we've spent probably a full day just animating bits of grass to make sure we were masking that tripod. So that's kind of like the optic you want to have. And this is using the GoPro VR Rison plugin. So basically we have, the idea with this is that you use the plugin to sort of rotate the image so that you have a good view of the things you want to get rid of. And then you nest that, so you create what's the same thing as a pre-comp in After Effects. And that nest, which is now a single element with everything inside, so my patch, my JPEG, the mask and everything, that works as one single sequence, and I can now put it back and just like orient it the way I want. So if I grab my plugin, I can then just like orient it and move it around and sort of do whatever I want with it. So here are some of the tools we have and what's happening about Fusion and AVP3.